This is an update on developments in numbers over the past year since the last EAMS. I said something after the last EAMS. I said in the coming year I'm going to focus less on developing new features in numbers and more on organising the content we've already got. We've got absolutely tons of content. Some of it's hard to find and some of it needs a bit more attention to make it as good as it could be. And that went somewhat well, not so much. So I'll start with some stats on the general state of numbers around the world. So these are some stats pulled from the numbers editor at Math Centre. We've just passed 100,000 questions written in the database, which is a nice milestone. There's almost 10,000 of those are published for anyone to use. We have around 8,000 registered users from roughly 1,500 institutions. That's measured just by looking at the ends of domain names. So a few underwhelming stats about the community, maybe. The runtime has been translated into 18 languages, which is really impressive. It means that numbers is being used around the world. There have been 20 pull requests on the various GitHub repositories in the last year. That's encouraging. It means that other people are contributing to the numbers code, and that's something I've always wanted to encourage. And I found around about a dozen papers mentioning numbers. I don't have any impulse to publish, but it's nice to see that other people do. We ran a user meeting this spring in May, gathering numbers users from around the world. We ran that through GatherTown. That was a lot of fun. We had around about 20 talks from a variety of people and lots of discussions about how numbers should work and doing more stuff, organising the community of users. The LTI tool, we released version 3. There are no massive functionality differences, just sort of keeping up to date with the latest versions of packages and things and making things more robust. So a lot of the asynchronous tasks that have to happen to do with marking are a bit better. I think I've knocked out a lot of race conditions. There's now an installer for Docker, which should make it a lot easier to run the numbers LTI tool, particularly if you don't have the IT resources to set up and run a Linux server on your own. Docker is a lot more straightforward. And the system for updating code and stuff, there are now tagged branches for the major versions, so it's a lot easier to know exactly what version you're on and how to upgrade. We've taken on a couple more hosting contracts. We at Newcastle run LTI servers for a few institutions now, and we're now in a position to do that a bit more. So if that interests you, talk to us. I published a schema for the exam format that Numbers uses. It's just a formality really, so if you make a tool that interacts with Numbers, that might be worth looking at. My aim for the year was to organise content better, and to do that we've set up a Numbers open resource library. The idea is that people will submit questions or exams into that. They will be moderated. We have a team of people who do the reviews and try and ensure a level of quality and consistency, so that when you go to the resource library, you'll know you'll find something that you can probably use. That work is in progress. It's going fairly slowly. I think the tools we need are all there now, and now we need to actually just do the reviewing. I started trying to write up some stuff about the design of numbers. I said I don't have any requirement to publish formally, but I think it's worth writing down something about the decisions behind how numbers works and how things were implemented. So I'm picking individual features out of numbers and trying to write short essays or papers about them. So you can go and have a look at that if you're interested. So this is the first of the new features for the year. There aren't too many new features this year. There's going to be a talk on the programming extension, which I helped with later in this conference. One of the things we needed was a code editor. So I've added the ability for extensions to provide a new kind of input widget, in this case an editing widget, and I think that's going to be very versatile. You can use that for code editors. I'm considering using it for the interactive diagram extensions, and then we're just missing some really common things like drag and drop and hotspot that I think would be good to at least prototype using this before making them proper built-in input methods. Also for programming, we needed the ability to evaluate code, which could take a long time. So not instantly when you press the submit button, which is the assumption for all the other part types. So marking algorithms now have this idea of pre-submit tasks. You can give a list of tasks to do. The marking pauses until those are all finished. They return some results, and then the rest of the marking algorithm runs. Again, that can be used for a lot more stuff than just the programming extension. Maybe, again, if you've got something embedded in the page and you need to communicate with it and check that it's loaded and all that, you can use pre-submit tasks for that. I've written an extension providing some stuff to do with graph theory. We had a third-year graph theory course that wanted to use numbers, so we needed the ability to generate random matrices and draw them, and do a lot of the manipulation and inspection tasks to do with graphs. A lot of the questions for that are published, so you can have a look at those. Before the JSX Graph conference last year, I spent some time improving the JSX Graph extension. There's now a much nicer way of both embedding diagrams, creating them, and interacting with part inputs. So in this video here, I've got a diagram. I can drag the dots around and it fills in that multiple choice, or when I fill in the multiple choice, it moves stuff on the diagram. There's a two-way link, so that's nice. For the open resource library, we needed some tools for submitting stuff and doing the review process, so I've added queues to the editor. The idea is that a user can submit an item to a queue, and then people who are on the list of reviewers can check it against a checklist, like tick things off as they go. There's a comments thread, so you can have a bit of back and forth with a submitter or with other reviewers. And then finally mark something as accepted. So we're going to use that for the resource library, but also we're planning on using that internally, providing a sort of a proof checking service. So anybody at Newcastle will be able to submit questions to our queue, and the numbers team will have a look at it. And that's available to everyone on the editor as well. So I know a few other people are already doing that. So that's what the the queue review page looks like. You get links to view the item, the checklist, and the comments thread. I tried to add a few helpful features in the editor. I think auto-completion is really helpful. If you can't quite remember the name of a function or exactly what form the parameters should take, so the editor now pops up little auto-completions as you type, which cuts out searching through the documentation. And also it will create entries for variables that you refer to elsewhere in the question. So you know to fill them in. It's not possible anymore to have a reference to an undefined variable. For next year, I have a few things to think about. I mean, my to-do list, as ever, is incredibly long. The things I would like to look at next year are something to do with showing working out. We have quite a few instances of there's a procedure the student must follow, and it's really an algorithm, so you don't know how many steps it's going to take. And how do you produce a good worked solution for that kind of thing, like describe to the student the steps. So I've done some prototypes around that. Here's an example with showing how to find the cycle decomposition of a permutation. So for each step in the algorithm, sort of produce an annotation which is shown to the student, and they're shown the state of the output at each step as well. slightly less interesting for me, but very important thing is to update the lockdown app. Like for years and years, we've been using a bespoke lockdown app at Newcastle that's only available to our students because it's built into our particular setup. We want to make something that's more generic, so we're working on making the app work with the LTI tool. It creates a special link which opens the app. The student has to enter in a password to decrypt the settings for the app when it then opens up at wherever it needs to be. That will work similarly to the Safe Exam Browser app. We've written our own one because already the main reason is that Safe Exam Browser doesn't run on Android and Linux, and we want to support every device that our students use. But having something specific to numbers, there might be other reasons that it will be beneficial, or it might be a chaotic task and we go back to Safe Exam Browser. But that's something I'm working on over the summer, and we really want to have this out by the time our next term starts in September 22. Finally, I'm going to try over the next year to encourage more people to contribute code to numbers, or to work on documentation, or just contribute to the project in more ways. We have a few hundred open issues on GitHub. We are hiring some students over the summer to work on just doing some code, and the e-learning team at Newcastle is growing very slightly as well. It would be really good to have some more contributions from other people. And that's it, a very quick whistle-stop tour of what's happened in numbers over the last year.
So thank you very much, Christian, for preparing this update to see what's new and actually what the plans are. And now let me open the floor for questions. As far as I can see, there is nothing in Moodle, but maybe there is something coming. In the meantime, Christian, is there any possibility to sort, the material related to the level of difficulty when you look at it?
It's one of the things we're trying to think about for this resource library, is exactly how you organize that. There has been for a long time in the editor a series of ability levels which are just linked to stages in the curriculum in the UK, because that's what I've got experience with, and that's not very well used. And really difficulty level isn't an objective fact about something, so it's quite hard to categorize anyway. So it's something we need to think about. There isn't a good solution yet.
Okay, yeah, especially if it is a large databases with a variety of users. Yeah, it's more difficult than if you are just building the database with the questions for the purpose of a study program or particular course. Yeah. Any other questions or remarks? Okay. If not, then I would just say that we are looking forward to the further development, and we are going to check on it, I hope, next year. And in the meantime, I wish you many users and even more contributors. Yeah. Okay. So thank you so very much. And now let me announce the second presentation today. It's Tech Development Update, Chris Sanguine, University of Edinburgh. So we can proceed on the second presentation today. This one not pre-recorded, but given by Chris. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me back again. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Chris Sanguine. I'm in the Maths Department at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm one of the developers of Stack. I instigated the Stack project, and I'm going to give you an update on developments. So we had an in-person conference in Austria that's been postponed. So the International Stack Users Group met. There were about 35 people in person and 100 people in total. I'm very grateful to the organisers for arranging that. I had some misgivings about going, I'll be honest. I had planned to stay in the UK this year, this calendar year, but I'm very glad I changed my mind and went. It was good for very many reasons, actually. So if you haven't managed to get to an in-person meeting yet, I encourage you to do so. There's the convenience of EAMS online, but there was something quite special about actually sitting down and chatting through issues with colleagues. So I'm very grateful to the conference organisers for arranging that. All the details of the software are on stackassessment.org. So let me just show you this website now. If you're not familiar with that, please, training and events. There's a whole bunch of case studies of how we're using Stack. And I'm going to talk about the Helm case study in a minute, so I'll come back to that one. You can link to the demo site and the documentation. And on that front, I'm very excited to announce that we're able to offer hosting Stack with Adena. So if we come back to the website, if you scroll to the bottom, there are other ways to find this link on this website, but if you go to hosting with Adena, many people in the UK will be familiar with Adena. Adena is based at the University of Edinburgh. It is now offering a hosted Moodle with Stack. If you have difficulty setting up your own server, or you don't have the ability to install Stack on your own server or so on, then Adena will be able to help with a hosted service. Your institution almost certainly already consumes services from Adena. They're world class, and I have every confidence that they're going to do an excellent job in hosting the Stack service. Setting up Stack has always been probably the most significant barrier to use, and I'm very glad that this is one way we can reduce that barrier. What have I been up to? As well, I'm in the middle of just about the annual update cycle. Really, we're preparing our teaching for next year already. We're checking our materials and we're getting things ready. So we'll be releasing a version of Stack sometime at the end of this month or the beginning of next month. It all depends on what happens with the testing. We're testing our materials and just finishing those things off. So there is still time, if you send me a pull request, to get new features in for the next. I have a limited amount of time to develop things from scratch myself, but if there are things you really want, please ask and we'll put them on the list. So what are the new features for the next year? The first is just running to keep up, really. Stack is part of the ILIAS learning environment and part of the Moodle learning environment. So I have to constantly keep up with the new versions of those bits of software. And Moodle 4 has some significant changes in it, which I'll come on to. So we will be adding support for Moodle 4. There are some unglamorous internal rewriting, which unblocks progress and does all sorts of things. So the PRTs, the potential response trees, are the algorithms which assess the students' answers. So we've re-engineered the way that the algorithms that assess answers are dealt with internally. And cast text is the computer algebra active text. That's the text in which allows you to embed Maxima code into the text. So when you write the question, you want to embed variables and things. So we've re-engineered both of these core components, and then we've got some genuinely new features. So quite a lot this year. So Moodle have re-engineered the way that the Moodle question database works. And one of the upshots of that is that the database now stores versions of the question. So when you edit your Moodle questions, you have a history of your previous edits, which of course has major advantages for question authors who want to try things out and then go back. Trying to fix a broken question will no longer be a fraught with trying to remember what you've done. But this does mean that there's an extra layer in the database now of versions. You don't just have questions, but you have versions of the questions. So this means please don't use older versions of Stack with Moodle 4. You'll have to wait for me to release the next version and then upgrade if you're using Moodle 4. But please don't use older versions of Stack. The core works fine. I've got no real concerns, but some of the yeah, anyway, some of the edge case things will not work because Moodle has changed. So the rewrites of the potential response trees and the cast text is thanks to Matti. Matti Harila of Aalto has done a huge amount of work over the last 2 years, and this is the result. I'm very grateful to Matti's ongoing support for this project. He's a key person, one of the 3 Stack developers, and this, of course, is all internal, and question authors won't see much, but there will be some subtle differences. So in the past, the way the Stack question was marked is we made multiple calls to the computer algebra system, and now each tree is a single Maxima statement. I'll demonstrate that in a minute. It's literally one piece of Maxima code for the whole tree. So that has huge efficiency gains. People who are reporting slowdown with very complicated trees, those will run almost as quickly now as a simple tree, because it's just one call to the cast, and that's what's really expensive. This also means that the marks and penalty fields can actually be variables now. I made an early design decision that they would be numbers and not variables, and then having made that decision, we were kind of stuck with it for years. And this re-engineering unblocks that and allows us, so you can define the marks in a variable field. And this is a real case of where I didn't really understand or envisage how people might use the software, but having seen some compelling use cases as why that's really useful, I now understand what other people need, and I can see the point of it. So I'm very happy that we've managed to get that done. You can now include code fragments and text from an arbitrary URL. And this is quite exciting because it will make it possible for non-developers to create and use libraries and share those libraries between questions. And this, I hope, will make it easier for people to contribute. And I'm going to show you one example in a minute of how that contribution can happen and how it can be valuable for everybody. Another thing is that students can download text files. So if they've got a data set to work on, you can randomly generate a data set and the students can download it. That's a very useful feature for better support for stats. And we've got much better support for JavaScript. So in particular, the computer algebra system can generate JavaScript with randomly generated parameters in it in a much more efficient way. So again, for people who want to write JavaScript, then we've got much better support for that. And of course, there's plenty of efficiency and security improvements inside, none of which people will see unless they break. So if I've broken some of your older questions, I'm sorry, these are genuine improvements. Please, if you have the opportunity to download the pre-release version from the dev branch and test your stuff now, would be a good opportunity to start testing, please, and let me know if you have any problems before we release the software. The earlier we start testing, the better, really. Okay, so one example of code fragments which can be included in the URL came from the Stack conference. Some colleagues in Germany demonstrated some very exciting new features of Stack, which they had written some Maxima code that they were cutting and pasting from question to question to question. I think now in the new version that would be on a library that they could include with a URL, but actually these features are so important that we put them into the core and we will maintain them. It's to do with the Demerel-Levenstein distance. So I didn't know about this until April, and the colleagues showed me this, but what this does is it measures the distance between strings. Okay, so it allows us to do string matching. So I'm just going to show you, this question on my, where are we? Here we are. This is Coulomb. This is literally my development machine in Edinburgh. So let's go to the solve quadratic and preview this question. So this is what the question does. So there are some standard kind of stack on the right-hand column. What are we supposed to do? For each step in the algebraic derivation, either complete the calculation in each step or explain what has been done. So we either complete the calculation or explain what's been done. So let's complete the calculations first. So factor the constant term, so x minus 8 all squared minus 5 squared equals 0. So this is a kind of standard stack question. And hence, okay, so we're going to solve the equation x equals 3 or 13. So for those people who are relatively new to STAT, there is a sort of validation step which separates out correctness from validation. This is parsed as x equals 3 or 13. So that's not what we meant. We want x equals 3 or x equals 13, right? I mean, it's pretty obvious what the student meant. Unfortunately, that's one of the downsides of strict syntax, because you have to say what you mean and not just assume people understand what you mean. Anyway, that's the stack side of it. And then what have we done here? Well, complete the square. And then if we check that, that's correct. And what have we done here? We've done difference of 2, right? And I made a couple of obvious spelling mistakes there. And the system picks up that that's the difference of 2 squares, and it's judged it to be correct, right? So I think this ability to actually accept text strings and establish whether or not they're acceptable text strings is a really exciting addition. And what the colleagues, I'll show you the documentation for that. This is the documentation. It's on the development. This is not on the main. This hasn't been released yet. But what this distance is, it's a pure metric. It's a genuine metric between strings, and it's basically the number of character edits. So insertions, deletions, transitions, or substitutions. And it was added by Akim and Andreas. And what they were doing is they had written the algorithm in Maxima to calculate this metric. It's a standard metric. It goes back to the 1960s, and it's actually underlies spell checking and autocomplete. It's a widely used in spell checking and autocomplete. So the advantage of using this particular algorithm is that there is an inbuilt spell check in this already. And they have designed a way of using this metric to create a way of testing students' answers. What they do is take this metric, which is, it gives you an integer number of single character edits, and then they renormalize it by dividing by the maximum length of the strings involved, and that gives us a similarity. If you subtract that from 1, you basically get a similarity. And then the answer test involves creating 2 lists, an allow list of the strings which are acceptable and a deny list of the strings which are unacceptable. And you calculate the similarity of what the student types to each of the things in the allow list, and then you calculate the similarity to each of the things in the deny list. And you want to make sure that the most similar string is in the allow list, and that the similarity of the student string to the most similar string is better than some pre-specified tolerance. So if we come back to this question and just look at the question tests, I've got some, this is on the development server, as you can see. I've still got some notices to tidy away, but what we're doing here is we are taking, I'll go for one that's not completely, so just one test case. Okay, so let's add another test case, and let's get the first input. It was complete the square, wasn't it? So it's a string. And let's get that wrong. Is it going to accept that as correct? Yeah, so that's close enough. So we can see here that what it's done is it has calculated that the string complete square is 0.933 similarity to complete square, and that was one of the strings in my acceptable list. So if we come down to the bottom here, my allow list was complete the square, completing the square, complete square, and my deny list was factor solve square, right? And I chose somewhat arbitrarily here a similarity of experience of using this answer test yet, but I can see why this is going to be a really valuable. And I think in practice, what we're going to have to do is fine tune these tolerances and the allow and deny list until, in a situation like this, we are sure that we have fenced off the allow and deny strings. But as a combination with the computer algebra support and now some robust text-based support with spell checking built in, this I think is a really powerful and exciting combination for kind of proof-based questions, longer derivations and the like. So if you would like to have a go at this, it's in the dev branch. If you'd like to have a pre-release test, comments and discussion of this would be very, very welcome. And the last thing I want to talk about is the Helm workbooks that we started last year. This is work that has been really pushed on by my colleague Konstantina. It's in one of the case studies. We started translating the Helm workbooks into foreign languages, but the Helm workbooks are a collection of 50 workbooks. They cover most of first and second year mathematics for engineering, and we now have about 2/3 of those up and ready for release. So if you'd like to find out more about what the Helm workbooks are, please have a look here. But we now have about 2/3 of a large engineering textbook in a consistent style, all battle tested over 2 academic years. And that will ultimately be released as open educational resources. So a lot going on, quite an exciting future. But in terms of the next release, we have support for Moodle 4, major rewrites of some internal components and some quite exciting new features. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Chris. It was really exciting, especially this new development about spell checking and so on. But let me now open the floor for questions. Again, as far as I can see, there is nothing in Moodle, or I'm not looking at the right discussion. I think there's nothing really there, but yeah, but maybe one question from my side. When you talk about this autocorrection, when there is some kind of a spelling mistake they can be corrected based on some previous entries
yeah, the teacher will have to specify what's allowable and what is a tolerance. So the similarity tolerance.
Yeah, so it means
that automatically condones a few spell checking mistakes. You know, if you mistype a single character, or you know, their THERE versus TH.
Yeah.
You know, the different spellings, or principle. You know, those kinds of minor things. If the teacher chooses to, by having a wide enough similarity, acceptable range, then we're not going to be penalizing students automatically. It's a long way from a string match. Yeah. And unlike regular expressions, you won't have to predict what they are. I mean, I have to say, I have not used this feature in Anger yet, but I can immediately see it's an exciting feature. And I can immediately see it fills an important gap in allowing us to ask for. And the real power of it, I think, is the multi-part questions, where you can have the text-based input as a multi-part question with some algebraic input. I mean, there was a lot of discussion about, well, why isn't this a separate question type? But it's the multi-part questions that are really the compelling case, I think. So if people would like to talk about that with me and start to think about how we might use it, I'd very much welcome a separate discussion. This is hot off the presses. I mean, I only found out about this in late April at the STAT conference, and I'm hugely grateful to Akim and Andreas for being so generous with the code they'd written in allowing me to include it in the STAT core. I mean, the algorithm itself, this actually vindicates my whole approach here, folks, in having the full computer algebra system, because this is quite a complex algorithm, but it turns out to be 8 lines of code when you have full matrices and reliable libraries for manipulating matrices. So the fact that they can program this algorithm in an efficient and effective way with so little code was a real vindication of having the full computer algebra system underneath. So I hope that other people will have opportunities to write similar libraries and share them now that they can include. I mean, these, poor Andreas and Akim were copying this code from question to question, and every time they wanted to change, part of their design, they had to update every question, and that's just ridiculous. So these new features that Matt has introduced should make innovations like this so much easier in the future.
Especially because it looks like on the first glance that it's invariant to the language, but
right. So that's absolutely right. So colleagues, colleagues who have, one thing that Matty suggested was that we need support for ignoring diacritical marks, for example, right? So there are some things that just don't occur in English. Right? I mean, it is by default, it's case insensitive. That was my choice, but there'll be other kinds of insensitivity that different languages need. So if you want to get started trying this out, then please let me know what you need and we'll try and get it in the main libraries as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? If not, let me just look again at the Moodle. Nothing so far, but yes, there can be later on some discussion and questions. There's the reason why we are using Moodle. So thank you very much, Chris. And now we are moving on the third presentation for today, web work development update. So several authors here: Michael Gage, Glenn Rice, Andrew Parker, Danny Glenn, Peter Staub. I don't know who's going to present, but yeah, we can start.
I think can you hear me now?
Okay, we can hear you, Peter.
Okay, I'm starting, and I think then we have Glenn and Andrew are going to help us out too. So just a quick, so this is an update on WebWork. If you haven't used it, it's an open source online homework system, very much in some of the flavors that we've already seen today. We have about 60,000 contributed problems, mainly in mathematics, but also expanding into physics and engineering chemistry. We've got about 10 languages in the interface. There's sort of the interface, which we'll talk about, and then there's actually problems as well. But the interface can be translated to about 10 languages. And last summer, we released 2.16, and we will go with 2.17 toward the end of the summer. We're in academia, right? This is when we get things done. So, okay. So I talk a little bit about what's new, and so there's a brand new look to it. From the sort of coding side of things, we're using Bootstrap to do a lot of the styling, version 5. This allows a couple of things. If you're doing stuff on phones, for example, the mobile interface is much easier both to write and also use. We've got a new way to theme things. You'll see a couple of themes today. A whole bunch of accessibility improvements, which is helpful. Quizzes, which have always been, I would say, a bit thorny. We've got a bunch of different ways of handling these. So the first thing is an auto submit. If the quiz is getting toward the end and we're running out of time, it will automatically submit the current answers in the quiz for the student. And then at the end, in addition, which is also helpful mainly from the student point of view, there's confirmation dialogues. How do we start a quiz, and giving some warnings about coming toward the end of them. So much easier sort of interactions with it. If you've ever used WebWork, there's sort of our standard library of problems, and there's something called contrib, which are maybe less polished. They haven't been vetted so much, but as I'll show you in just a second, you'll be able to use these as easily as other ones. And then again, everybody's been talking about integrating in, say, Moodle and other CMSs. We have a bunch of these enhancements to do this. Basically being able to kind of keep students within the course instead of accessing things different ways. As an instructor, there's a course level customization, which I will also show a screenshot on in just a second. There's also on the problem side of things, which we call the PG side, there's some drag drop problems. There's a new graph tool that came out last summer. We've got some improvements to that. And then entering formulas, there's things called MathQuill. Glenn's going to show all this stuff in just a second. So, Let me just show you a screenshot of the library browser. This allows, again, to include the standard problems, which we call the open problem library, and then also contrib. So this is now kind of built in if you're accepting problems from contrib in that. So this allows a much broader number of problems we can look at. And I just wanted to show the LTI configuration. It's got its own configuration panel now with some of the things that an instructor can sort of set up without having to either write code or have an administrator do, which is also quite nice. So there is a little bit of behind the scenes that needs to get this going. So I think at that, I will turn it over to Glenn. Glenn, do you want to share your screen then? I'll get out.
All right, so I'm going to demonstrate these things in action that Peter just mentioned. So of course, the new user interface. This is the Fitchburg State theme. This is hosted on Peter's server. It's very easy to create a new theme. Just a couple of variables need to be changed. Of course, you can see if you've used WebWork before, you probably see things already that are looking different. I'm going to first start by looking at a quiz. So before, all quiz versions would be listed on this page with all the homework sets, and it got a bit cluttered. Now, all those quiz versions are on a separate page. You see previous versions will be listed if you have any. A little bit more information. Of course, one of the nice things is now you can have a set header or set info, which is displayed. Previously, that was not an option for quizzes. Click on Start New Test, of course, to start a new test. Your time limit up there. So this looks much the same. This is a gateway quiz. Got several of the problems he mentioned. The drag and drop macro has been improved and is now an officially supported macro. Previously, it was just hidden in the OPL. One of the features that was added to the drag and drop macro is that you can now have more than just 2 bins or buckets, as the developer decided to call them. Here we have 3 buckets. You can sort this, the dihedral set, into its cosets. That's probably not right. You'll notice this just popped up, the time remaining. So that's now a toast instead of an somewhat intrusive dialogue that popped up and stopped everything. You can continue work while that is there. And doesn't interfere, but lets you know what's going on. Now the next, the graph tool macro, this was introduced in the last release, allows you to graph objects. One of the new features with this is it now has keyboard interaction. So you can use a keyboard to move points around. Tab and Shift Tab can be used to move between points on the graphed objects. Of course, you can also start new graphed objects. There are also some new tools. This problem demonstrates that you can shade. That wasn't new. You can have already existing graphed objects that are part of the problem. That's not new. The new tools are the point tool. That was actually developed by Alex Jordan at Pacific Community College, just for graphing points. Then there is the 3-point quadratic tool. I'm going to be interrupted here in a second. One of the new features is that there's an auto submit. This happens about 10 seconds before the end of the grace period, and there it just happened on me. I set this to be a short term. That was something that's been requested. Going on here, the 4-point cubic tool. You can graph cubics and quadratics in different ways. Previously, there was just the vertex and another point graphing method. Now we have the 3-point quadratic tool. And I ran out of time, so I'm going to have to start a new version. So one of the other features is that if you're in a test in progress and hit submit or grade test, instead of it just automatically submitting, you get a little dialogue that lets you confirm that that's really what you want to do. One of the problems we used to have was students would hit grade test when really all they wanted to do was save their answer on a particular problem and grade the whole test, and then they can't do anything more. So this lets them know that's not what they wanted. That was particularly a problem when gateway quizzes had multiple pages. So those are the features of gateway quizzes. Some other things, MathQuill improvements. MathQuill was introduced actually 2 releases ago. But there are some problems that a lot of people have complained about. One of them is mixed numbers. This problem demonstrates all these things in one problem. You can now use mixed numbers efficiently. One of the advantages is you can easily type in a mixed number by using spaces. Previously, spaces were completely disabled. Now you can use spaces at the root level. So you can enter a mixed number by putting a space in between easily. One of the other things is units. When units are expected in a problem, previously that had a lot of issues. Now they'll just work. You can type them in a very natural way. Previously you had to use the text button on the dialog and enter it as text, which was a bit annoying. And the last thing is scientific notation. Previously that just failed because of some additional parentheses MathQuill injected that the PG math objects didn't deal well with. Now those are no longer input. Instead, different handling of order of operations is done on the PG side. So things should work much better with problems that had some of those different inputs that were expected. All right, so I think I'm out of time, but those are the main features. Some other features, things work much better on mobile devices. I'll quickly show that. Bring this down to a narrow screen. The nav works better on mobile devices than it did before, and things generally work well, look better. The layout is much more adaptive. All right, I'll turn it over to Andrew to finish this off.
Thanks, Glenn. Peter, do you mind putting the slides back up?
Cancel. I'm working on it. Let's see. Oops. Is that up?
There we go.
Okay. You need me to scroll?
Yes, thank you. Pass the demo, thank you. All right. So there's several ways we'd like to announce for people to get involved with our development efforts. We've been working on a complete redesign of WebWork, WebWork 3. We've got a code camp coming up this coming Thursday for anybody who'd be interested in joining us. We're going to talk about how to set up the development environment and kind of get everyone used to where we're at. The WebWork 3 demo, I don't think we have time for that. But things are coming along nicely. And we'll have other code camps happening this summer as well. Maybe one on the PG side where we work on developing the structure that fuels the problems that authors can write, and maybe one as well for the open problem library, because similar to what Christian was mentioning, organizing a library is a cumbersome task, and we've got a lot of work to do in that direction as well. We've got Slack channel set up if you'd like to stay abreast of what we are what we're working on, or if you're just looking to get started and have questions about getting things set up, we have these channels available. I can actually put that in the chat. Oh, and do we have anything after this, Peter? Yeah. just our websites, right? So we've got openwebwork.org, the GitHub repository, and Peter's email. So if you have any questions or concerns, Peter's going to be the point of contact for that, I guess.
I'm also, if you're interested in the WebWork 3, I'm sort of running that this Thursday, and you can email me about that. I already see that there's somebody here at the talk is coming Thursday. I think Zach, I saw, so.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Peter, Glenn, and Andrew. It was really interesting presentation of the development. I really support that we giving students some info when they are very near the end with the quizzes, because sometimes they are confused and under stress when they are solving something. So all these messages are really important, even though for us sometimes it is it seems like too much. Yeah. Any other questions or remarks, comments here? If not, then yeah, Debbie. Yes.
Yeah, I put it in the Moodle too.
Okay. Just please ask.
Sure. This is not entirely specific to WebWork, but has anyone found a way to administer the gateway quizzes in conjunction with a lockdown browser? Because from what I understand, if your students authenticate through LTI in your VLE or LMS, when you're in the lockdown browser in a quiz, the LTI authentication doesn't work. So I'm wondering, for the people who give quizzes, how do you make sure the students are not using Wolfram Alpha on the side or something like that, even if they're in person taking the quiz?
Yeah, at this point, I don't know about lockdown browsers. I haven't looked into that. I don't think it works well, and we haven't done anything on that end.
Okay, maybe some more info in Moodle discussion then. Yeah. Okay, later. So I think that we are successfully coming to the end of this session, second session of our conference. And at the end, I would like to thank you all presenters and all of you that have been here and support not just presentation, but our personal development in this area. So I think that now we can close this session. And Christian, should we share actually the agenda for the next session? Because I'm not able to, due to some technical reasons. But yes, with this we are going to close the session today, and looking forward to the next sessions that are in plan, and that there are very exciting ones in front of us. For example, tomorrow you can see when it is 9 a.m. UK time, but you know, all of us know when to join. So have a very nice rest of the day, and see you soon. Thank you.